actually, I wanted to call it Two Girls, One Show, which I can say now since we're not associated with Yahoo anymore. All right, then. We spent most of the time. We spent a lot more time talking about Group B than expected. So let's move on to the actually interesting groups, which are
Group A.
Group A. Yes, Griffin, Cloud9, G2, and Hong Kong Attitude. Right? Those are the first two matches going into Friday. So I think that the interesting thing about G2 is that they're definitely kind of unique in the context of the history of Worlds because they're a really, really strong Western team pegged as a favorite going into the event. And also, I feel like they're kind of one of the first, or maybe the only first successful super team. Where at the start of the season, if you asked me who's the strongest in each position in Europe, I would probably say these players. Maybe not Perks AD, but definitely the rest of them. So I think that, and maybe I would have even argued Perks or Caps, right, in mid, based on Perks' World Championship performance. So I think that that's something that's really interesting about this particular team, because the fact that they managed to get that to work out, and I think a lot of times those teams don't function because every player comes in with a definitive way of playing the game. It seems like all of these guys kind of want to play it the same way and are willing to kind of fire on different cylinders, even if that means someone ints for an entire game and gets threatened to be transferred to Turkey. So, but obviously, like, are you concerned about the last G2 Hong Kong Attitude game?
Not really.
Mm-hmm.
I think G2 are still definitively the strongest team that we've seen at this tournament, and that includes SKT. But again, like, I think the caveat there is that SKT has had to face tougher teams. So that should be taken into consideration.
That Cloud9 and Griffin are not very strong, Emily.
They're not as strong as Fnatic. Yes, Fnatic. I know a ton of you are going to get mad about that, but they're not as strong as Fnatic and RNG. That I still think that, even though I know so many of you are mad at Fnatic's drafting. But I think I am not actually concerned about G2 at all.
Okay.
I think that the weirdest, or like probably most frustrating thing I think about the HKA game that people notice is, like, once they kind of flipped a switch and they were like, okay, we know how we can, like, despite kind of making a lot of mistakes, inting, whatever you want to call it, we know how we can win this game. And we know how we can execute our composition to win this game. And they did. And that's why I'm not super concerned about G2. I still have them first to make that this group. I still have them as the favorite to take the entire tournament. Nothing I've seen from them in play-ins play-ins. Wow. Okay, I'm tired. Nothing I've seen from them in groups has changed my mind on that. And yeah, I still think they're going to make it out as the first seed from this group.
I don't think we'll argue too much about G2 first and Hong Kong Attitude last, right?
No.
Okay, so then we can just move on to the pertinent question of this group, which is Griffin or Cloud9. And looking at both of these teams, it's really interesting because obviously people are just kind of like wiping the fact that Blabber is starting under the rug as, oh, it must be a strategic decision of some kind. But to me, it's really weird, right? Because obviously the turmoils that are going on in Griffin are very, very prevalent on social media. And I'm not going to argue that Cloud9s are on the same par, but I feel like something strange is going on just based on this decision. So I know that I can speak that almost every scrim block with C9 Academy had a swap between Blabber and Svenskeren all summer. So it's not like Blabber just has not played with this team at all. So maybe they are just kind of throwing him in, but it still feels really strange in the context of what happened last year with Blabber only playing in play-in, right? And not playing in Worlds at all after that. So that feels really, really weird to see, and a match that should be like really high. You can almost argue that they were throwing in the towel for some reason against G2, but like a very, very high level performance match. Like they obviously came in with a really, really clear plan and a way to execute it, but they stumbled a lot. And I think that naturally C9's macro game is almost to a point where they can't just beat Griffin if Svenskeren is playing, and they're using Svenskeren to control the midsection in the mid to late game, not the early game, guys. Mid to late game. Where I actually think Griffin are more exploitable than a lot of people think, so.
Yeah, I think what we've seen from Blabber positives is that he is like, so setting what Svenskeren looks like with the team aside, what we've seen from Blabber positives is that he is willing to be aggressive early. I thought his tracking of Yonkos was actually quite good. I thought his diving turrets with Elise without proper setup against Griffin was not as good. So like he tends to have this go button, and I don't think this should come as a shock to anyone who's watched Blabber. Like he tends to have this go button that's always on, and if it works, it's going to work really well, and if it doesn't work, it is just going to cost you some advantages. That being said, I don't think he was in any way the reason why they lost their game against Griffin, and I think they, talking to Zazel afterwards and seeing the C9 players talk about it themselves, I think they're more than well aware of how they misexecuted their composition, basically by calling Licorice over to the 4 when he should have been splitting in the side lane. And I think like they themselves know what they misexecuted, so it's probably a really rough game for them to go back and look at, because it, in my opinion, it really should have been a C9 win. Outside of that misexecution in the mid game, right? So, I still weirdly, so full disclosure, before any of this group stage started, I still did have Griffin getting out. I thought they were a quarterfinals team at best, but I did think they would make it to quarters. Based on what I've seen in this group, I think they're actually weirdly in more trouble than C9 is. Putting aside like whatever is going on with the team itself and the external issues, which I think like my take on that is that the people you should be siding with are the players themselves in this situation. Like, forget CV Max, forget the Griffin head manager or whatever. Like, the players are the people you should be siding with, because they're the ones that have to go out and play every day. In terms of Griffin's weaknesses, like, so again, before this even started, I said quarterfinals team at best, and that's because of the way Griffin play and because they are so remarkably cautious to the point where it hurts them. It actively hurts them. There are so many windows of opportunity that they pass up in all stages of the game, but particularly the mid game, in my opinion, where they could snowball their advantages, where they could take advantages of power spikes or setups that they automatically have with their compositions, and they just don't, despite the fact that they have the talent to pull this off.
I think that
has been a I was just gonna say it's been a frustration of mine with Griffin, for years, like since last year.
I kind of want to make it a little bit clearer what my difficulty or my criticism of Griffin's kind of mid-game map movements is, and why I think that they're inferior to a lot of the teams of the tournament, which is just that when you're looking to set up for an objective, either Baron or Dragon, right? In the mid to late game, if I elucidated at that point, it's clear like what I'm talking about. You often want to have your dual lane, your and your jungler are usually, like, obviously no composition is completely 100% standard, but you usually want them to kind of control the mid wave and to be able to call whether or not they need help getting mid wave prio. And if you're able to do that and you're able to push the wave and crash it against the opposing mid turret, then basically you have the ability to zone the enemy off of the objective and control vision first, right? And then you control that area and you can secure the objective in that way. If the enemy then tries to face check, basically you're creating a decision tree where if they go for the objective, you can just push all the way down, maybe get a stronger objective off of having that wave push. If they go for the wave, then you get the objective for free and then you can match them. These kinds of situations that you create with decision tree, Tarzan, when it comes to contesting objective, almost always like kind of resets late for it, and then he'll go straight to the objective, and he won't help whoever is in charge of controlling the midsection with the wave at that point. So it's very easy for teams, and this is why I actually think SKT consistently beats them, is because they're one of the better teams in LCK at kind of checking this wave, and this is why they prioritize Ezreal, is because Ezreal gets control of the mid priority really, really easily, even if you don't play to have a stronger dual lane later on. And so that's why I think they consistently lose to SKT, and this is why I think I kind of favored C9, because, you know, to use the Rift Rivals meme, if there's one thing that NA players are good at, it's playing for the mid wave. It's just they forget to do other stuff. And I actually think usually C9 are kind of above average in the context of LCS in terms of playing at like 1-3-1s and 1-4s. But obviously that game is not a good example whatsoever. So I think that maybe that is incorrect, but I don't think it's incorrect, because I think a lot of LCS teams can't handle it usually still. So yeah, so that's why I had them over. It had nothing to do with like aggression, or I mean, to an extent I think it does have to do with aggression and early moving, and I think whatever Griffin's jungle tracking system is usually pretty poor, because I consistently see players just get cut out, and I don't know if that's Tarzan's fault or whose fault. Usually it's the jungler's responsibility to track enemy jungler, whatever. I can't really discuss what their comp system is, or maybe he's very good at tracking it and his lanes just are deaf. I don't know. Life happens.
I think his lanes, so, I think Griffin's lanes
or they don't know how to manage their waves, right? Maybe they don't know how to manage their waves, so even if he's calling it in advance where the jungler is going to be, they don't know how to set up their waves, so they're not losing too much if they're not overextended. Something along those lines is the problem. So I think those are like kind of my issues with Griffin overall, and that's why I had C9 favored over them. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, based on their performances, I think C9, again, like, putting aside whatever is going on with Blabber and Svenskeren, like, oddly, I think C9 have more fixable issues than Griffin, because Griffins have been, like, endemic to the team, and I don't think, to some extent, they see anything wrong with that. Like, their response in interviews, and this isn't recent interviews, it's been since last year again, whenever they've lost or whenever they've looked less than, like, dominating, because this is a very dominant team in terms of win record, right? Whenever they've looked less than that, they've always responded, oh yeah, like, we believe in our play style, we just need to execute it better. And that tells me that they don't really see anything wrong with the way they're playing right now. They just feel like they're not executing it to, like, the best of their ability, which also may be true, but at the same time, I think it's what might make some of these problems like a massive blind spot for them. And also why, like, talking to C9, I think they're at least a bit more cognizant of what their mistakes were on stage, right? Like, they were like, they're not like, oh yes, we have to double down on what we did. They're like, no, we made a mistake, like, here, and we're gonna fix it for next time. So even though I initially had Griffin coming out of this group, and even though they're in a better position than C9, I actually think that over the break, the team with the better ability to fix their in-game issues would actually probably be C9.